And I think at some point the industry is going to have to synthesize on how the CRO partner shares risk, not in the sort of traditional sort of bonus penalty side, but how do we share risk and ensure that we're not just executing from an operational standpoint, so enrolling studies, gathering data, finishing data sets and analysis, but really sort of moving up the development chain. How do we add value from a clinical and scientific standpoint? Can we provide input at the protocol level that helps support the integrity of the data and the quality of the data that's coming in? And then ultimately on the commercial side, how do you ensure that the positioning of that molecule, should it be safe and efficacious, optimizes the potential revenue from a reimbursement standpoint and a pricing standpoint? So what's that label going to look like? What is the end game in terms of that label? What is the commercial market? And how can we ensure that we're making the right decisions that advances Astellas and our other partners' pipeline to the point that they are successful commercially, and that results in further investment back into R&D, which ultimately should benefit both sides of the partnership.
So there's been a lot of talk about risk sharing and different models that will enable the CRO to not to be able to accrue the benefits whether the drug fails or succeeds. Is industry moving in that direction, do you think? I mean, are the companies ready to establish those types of relationships?
Very slowly. Peter and I had this discussion up front on what metrics we would use to measure our success. And it does come back a lot to sort of cost of input. I think it's very difficult to find that alignment. I think we're looking with our partners to find ways where we can share, not just in the success, but share around the sort of collective responsibility and ownership. It's quite often perceived that the CROs don't care as much about a particular program or molecule as the sponsor companies. I can tell you across the majority of our teams, that's not the case. I mean, I got an email from one of our leadership group who was so excited. In her email, I'm so excited I can hardly type. We've got headline results for a program that we've been working on for about 3 or 4 years with one of our partners, and the results look fantastic. And the vested interest that team has is significant, and they feel the disappointment when studies don't progress. Mm-hmm. How you then translate that sort of emotional alignment into a sort of financial model that supports both sides, I think is still a work in progress. I haven't seen any good ones. I think there are some in the public domain that are still in that bonus penalty category, which I think is a step in the right direction, but they're not as aligned in terms of other industries where there's mutual benefit in the sponsor organization driving sort of volume and their commercial success, and it benefits, for want of a better term, the vendors that support that process. I think the misaligned economics, both in terms of the financial economics and the time frame, makes that very difficult.
One comment on the risk sharing. I think industry is open to do more risk sharing these days as we have more things to put forward in the pipeline and finite resources. I think there are opportunities to risk share. I think the biggest challenge is, as a sponsor, we often don't get the sense that the CRO has the same vested interest in the assets as we do. At the end of the day, if there's a problem with the asset, we don't run back to the CRO and point the finger there. The accountability stays with the sponsor. So I think we do need to figure out, how do we better align that? Perhaps some organizations are more tightly bound with their partners than others. I think in our case, at the end of the day, when a study has a negative outcome or the ball has been dropped somewhere, my management doesn't come to me and say, well, the CRO dropped it. They look at me and they say, hey, what went wrong here?
I don't think we should be confused about the two different types of relationships. So on the one hand, there is a cost of development, whether you have a good molecule, bad molecule. And it's really around decision-making and design that leads you down the path of great decisions as to moving from one phase to another. There is a sunk cost. Once we agree that we have to do a study, it doesn't matter who's executing, there is a cost associated with that. And we could argue until the cows come home as to whether it's cheaper or more expensive on either side. Mm-hmm. We remove that from our relationship because our relationship is about success and quality. And that's within execution. When we talk about risk sharing, it's a totally different conversation because each side wants to leverage based on the probability of success, and that's more around the molecule. Yes, you could mess up the design of a study, but there again, you wouldn't have had any conversations with any regulatory agencies. They're really there to help guide us. So it's really back to, is the molecule an asset that is valuable enough for somebody to want to come in and enjoy the returns? And hypothetically, both sides are there in terms of understanding what the gain is and what the risk is. But there is this hesitation to think about our CRO partners as co-development partners like we do with our, we're more likely to go to BMS or J&J and say, hey, let's make a deal. And nobody actually talks about the cost. Everybody blames development operations for spending the money, but there will be a deal. And I think it's jumping over this hurdle of our perception. And yes, indeed, our perceptions are, borne out by some evidence where our CROs are not investing in the competency and in that, I want to call it that robustness that speaks sponsor, that speaks financial sponsor. But we have everything we need to make those relationships work, but they're different. And maybe I'm wrong, but I'd like to look at them differently, because I wouldn't want my team and Jamie's team executing on the portfolio that Astellas has and worrying about, is this financial risk worth it? Because the company's made a decision to invest in a molecule, and we have to execute on the molecule. Two different, and they're more or less parallel conversations about financial risk and reward.
Right.
Yeah.
So Karen,
I think that's a very good point, Peter. And I think it comes down to defining the role of the CRO. I've worked in many industries, and only in this one the last 9 years or so. And when I look at it, there is a very close sort of relationship in many ways, I think, because of the background of the people that are common to both CROs and pharma companies, of symbiotic relationship between CRO and pharma, and as if we're almost the same but just doing different things in the process. And I'm not sure, when I look at risk sharing, that that's the way I would approach it. And I'm not sure. I mean, it's something that's current, and it's happening, and it's evolving. But I think if you look at the CRO as being a professional advisor whose job is to make sure that our staff are trained and engaged, and feel our customers' pain and share. I mean, that was a good point that Jamie made about being engaged in the success of a molecule. I know staff we have in strategic partnerships now listen to our customers' earnings calls as soon as they listen to our own, and things like that. So you get that level of shared ownership. But I think we have to be careful at the point of deciding on risk. Who owns the molecule? What our shareholders want. If our shareholders wanted to invest in drug development, they could just as easily invest in BMS or Astellas. When you look at what professional services organizations do, you don't see large consulting companies. They can give excellent advice, accountants, lawyers, consultants, to their customers. They can care, they can do quality, but and they charge their fees, and then that's their job, and their job is to do that. So some of the bonus penalty arrangements, yes, they encourage certain kinds of behaviors, but getting into full-blown risk around sharing in the substantial benefits of a molecule. They also raise sort of independence issues around how people are incentivized in a trial, and they raise competitive issues in that we work for a number to survive and prosper. We need a number of strategic partners. So are you more invested in some? Are you betting the farm on a molecule with one partner and not on the other? So I think it's an area that needs a lot of thought and needs a definition of what is the role of the CRO relative to the role of the pharma industry.